Greetings and welcome to Hearthstone Theory's Top 3 Foreseen, Feared, and Forgotten for the Taverns of Time. Today, Blizzard is releasing 28 cards into the arena, 10 neutral and 2 for each class. And honestly guys, they're all really freaking cool. In fact, I can't really claim that any of these cards are forgettable. Pretty much all of them have merit of some form, and even the ones that might not work are really interesting. So I'm here to do what any sane Hearthstone streamer or YouTuber would do, and that's pick the most exciting, frightening, and underwhelming cards of the set. Though again, underwhelming is a term a little too harsh for any of these cards. So without further ado, here's Hearthstone Theory's top 3 foreseen, feared, and kinda sorta mediocre of the Taverns of Time. Anyone who's seen the latest custom card coverage knows that I am passionate about Ragnaros. I miss you, Ragnaros. Never leave me again. So it stands to reason that I would cherish the opportunity to use him again. Enter Wildlands Adventurer, which enables precisely that. Now sure, you're just as likely to get a Cold Light Oracle or an Ice Lance, but this card has adequate stats to stand for itself so long as it provides some form of card. The fact that the card is likely to be some of our old favorites is all the better. So yeah, this gets my seal of approval any day. Ripple in Time. This card isn't actually that frightening, considering the large pool of minions it draws from. But the thing is, most of this set is actually fairly balanced, so filling the third slot of my feared list was actually a bit of a challenge. So while Ripple in Time isn't prone to being overly powerful all the time, it does have a few instances where it can showcase great strength. To name a few strong Discover choices, Crystalline Oracle, Radiant Elemental, Shadow Ascendant, Argent Squire, Firefly, Glacial Shard, Knife Juggler, Loot Hoarder, Happy Ghoul, and Stonehill Defender. Failing at snagging any of these, this card still succeeds at being a normal Discover effect, albeit a relatively imprecise one. Its versatile strength gives it just enough of an edge to worry me. While all of the cards being introduced are curiosity-provoking, a few of them are a tad underwhelming. The most so is Infinite Murloc. That's not to say this card is useless. In fact, it can be quite powerful if you draft multiple copies of it. But the first time you play this card, it will be below average, the second time it will be okay, and by the time you get to the third instance, you're probably in the mid or late game, and that's assuming you've drafted 3 or 4 copies of this card. Additionally, the Murloc tag is unlikely to give you much benefit in Arena, so the only way this card could work is if you had the means to cycle through your deck quickly, and the extra Murlocs could be used to avoid copious fatigue damage. That seems pretty unlikely. Though, side note, this card is another strong Ripple in Time exploit. Just saying. This card is actually a bit of an interesting one, because when I first looked at it, I thought it sucked. Flash Forward appears quite stupid. You spend 1 mana, 3 minus the 2 you gained, to give your opponent more mana and cards for the next turn. It seems slanted in your opponent's favor, until you consider 2 things. First off, you're a druid, and as such, ramping your mana up is more valuable to you than most of your opponents. If you play this on turn 3, you have a plan you are enacting, perhaps a 6 mana play you're saving. Your opponent will be less likely to benefit as heavily. Secondly, in the late game, this card becomes 1 mana, both players draw 2 cards. You get access to these cards to use on your turn immediately, which makes this card very valuable in a top deck situation. It's basically a cheaper Cold Light Oracle. So, if you build the right deck, this card is both good in the early game and in the late game. That's really cool, and surprisingly tricky to understand. That earns it a position on my good list. Fast-paced gameplay, a sense of impending dread, overwhelming power. These words do not describe Nozdormu in the slightest, but they might describe Murozond. This card gives the benefits of a Luneth with the drawback of Nozdormu. However, these effects are permanent for the remainder of the game. In the hands of an intelligent deckcrafter and witty player, this can be overwhelming, allowing the game to snowball in favor of the card's wielder. That's very interesting and quite appealing, but utterly horrifying. The good news is this card has weaknesses. It has the best results only if you use cards that are simple to play, are better in the late game, and have a way to prevent fatigue damage. Son of a... Despite my praise of Flash Forward, you do need to be careful when using it, since your opponent could drop a powerful minion before you can. Now for a card that does exactly that, and only that, Harbinger of Catastrophe. This card's best case scenario is heavily dependent on how your opponent has chosen to draft their deck. Did they include a strong high cost minion or not? Regardless of the answer, your minion will get pulled to the field and will be unable to do anything, while your opponent's minion will be able to do something their next turn. This means that this special effect is more beneficial to your opponent, barring the case of them not having any powerful minions in their deck. All in all, it just doesn't add up. The first time I read the text for Infinite Wolf, I was a little frightened, until I realized a subtle difference between it and Infinite Murloc. While the Sea Crawler creates a copy of itself to be shuffled, this card shuffles itself back into your deck. With that in mind, this card basically becomes a removal tool that perpetually becomes more powerful, unless you choose to not use its rush effect. Even in that case, it will shuffle itself away the next time it attacks. Despite this unusual interaction, other synergies exist to balance this card out, notably with Dire Frenzy and Murozond. In the hands of an intelligent player, this card can become an excellent source of control while still requiring careful planning to execute well. If you're going to play Hunter in Arena, draft as many of these as you can since they buff each other, and think carefully about when and how you use them. Hey, do you guys remember Sap? You know, that card that serves as a cornerstone to many rogue decks and basically prevents those decks from ever getting run down by strong minions? Well, Chronoshot does the same thing, except better. Sap and Chronoshot both work as deterrents, being used to negate your opponent's last chunk of mana spent. If hitting a valuable target, the resulting power swing can be game-ending. In the hands of Hunters, which can get infamously powerful if you let them gain control of the board, this is bad news. Freezing Trap's removal effect is powerful enough when your opponent chooses which minion is affected. With this card, no such weakness. Playing high-costed minions against a Hunter never felt so futile, not since the Face Hunter days at least. Is that terror really worth the top spot on my feared list? Yes. Yes, it is. Boy, I'm going to be playing a lot of Hunter in Arena this month. Alright guys, time for me to come clean. I tried to find 3 cards for each of these categories, but fell short. The thing is, each of these cards does completely different things, and all of them are unique, interesting, and fairly balanced. So for the top spot on the kinda mediocre list, I'm not going to give you a particularly bad card, because frankly, there isn't one. But there is one card worth mentioning as, shall I say, uniquely situational. Ripple in Time, Infinite Murloc, and Infinite Wolf all have the capability of becoming powerful ways of having multiple minions in your deck or on your field. The same can be true for other Echo cards or just minions you decide to draft multiple copies of. How do you counter this? What can be done? Well, Fate Cleave them. This acts as elegant in its simplicity, destroying certain combinations before they begin. That's fascinating, intriguing, and definitely worth keeping an eye out for if you're facing a warrior and running Echo minions. Does this situational power make it deserving of my most kinda mediocre slot? Of course not. But the problem is that this tech option belongs to one class, which means that you have a 1 in 9 chance to even be facing this class, let alone this card. Even then, you have nothing to worry about unless you're drafting Echo or Infinite, which you can always keep in reserve until after your opponent gives up and uses this axe on less potent targets. Still, if you think you can find a use for this card, like with the other kinda mediocre cards, go right ahead, they're all good cards. As are the other 19 cards in this set that I didn't have the time to cover today. So as we venture into the Taverns of Time, make sure to draft all of these new cards, see which ones work and which do not, and let me know what you thought was the best or the worst. Until then, I'll see you in the tavern next time.